Burkina Faso is acting like a reckless child in a very dangerous neighborhood.
Late afternoon sunlight bled through the tall windows of a Washington briefing room as reporters jostled for position. Rumors had already spread across diplomatic channels that Donald J. Trump, now back on the campaign trail and never one to shy away from a headline, was preparing to make sharp remarks about the recent political trajectory of Burkina Faso. Cables from Ouagadougou hinted that Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the young leader who had risen with thunderclap swiftness, was ready to answer. The world, still raw from years of shifting alliances, leaned closer. Trump appeared at the podium with the familiar swagger that once electrified his rallies. His voice carried the familiar blend of entertainment and blunt provocation. "We're seeing a lot of very bad moves out of certain places in Africa," he began, chopping the air with his palm. "Burkina Faso, frankly, is taking steps, dangerous steps, aligning with countries that do not have freedom, do not have democracy. People say it's bold leadership, I say it's reckless. Terrible for the region, terrible for business. We worked hard, very hard, to stabilize things. And now you've got a captain, making decisions that could push millions into chaos." The White House briefing room hummed with camera shutters. Trump's words were clipped, deliberate. Ibrahim Traoré should think twice. If he continues on this path, there will be consequences. Economic, diplomatic, you name it. We won't stand by while radicals rewrite the rules. Within hours, networks looped the clip, analysts dissecting every phrase. Pundits described the remarks as classic Trumpian pressure, a blend of warning and self-promotion. But beneath the din, another narrative was taking shape thousands of miles away in Ouagadougou. Across Burkina Faso's dusty capital, the streets carried a restless energy. Young soldiers in crisp fatigues walked past market stalls, their expressions set with quiet resolve. Posters of Traoré, bareheaded gaze lifted skyward, fluttered on walls streaked with years of rain and sun. For many Burkinabe, he was no mere interim figure. He was a symbol of defiance, of a continent long determined to chart its own course. The presidential compound was alive with hushed phone calls and steady footsteps. Inside, Traoré paced beneath a ceiling fan, a briefing folder tucked under his arm. His advisors read the transcripts of Trump's remarks, highlighting phrases, weighing their tone. Outside, the Sahelian dusk painted the sky in copper and violet. "He speaks like we are pawns," murmured Minister Cabaret, scanning the statement again. "He thinks sanctions frighten us." Traoré's reply was measured, his voice calm. "He thinks fear builds empires, but fear is already broken here." His fingers traced the rim of a coffee cup as he gazed at the courtyard palms. "If I answer, I must speak not only for Burkina Faso, but for every village that has waited generations for respect." He stepped to the window, watching soldiers salute passing civilians. For Traoré, the struggle had never been abstract. Born. In the dusty heart of the Sahel, he had watched his homeland endure drought, instability, and the quiet arrogance of distant powers. Friends had left, chasing salaries in foreign lands. He had stayed, first as a soldier, then as a captain determined to halt the drift toward despair. Now his name was splashed across international headlines alongside one of the most polarizing figures in American politics. The weight was heavy, yet oddly clarifying. "If they challenge us, let them hear a voice they cannot dismiss," he said finally. Aide-de-camp Sanu nodded. "The world expects an answer." Night fell over Ouagadougou as journalists gathered outside the compound gates, their satellite trucks buzzing with quiet anticipation. Tweets rippled through African media circles. Will Traoré respond? Historic moment for the Sahel. Hashtags in French and more spilled across timelines, calling for dignity, sovereignty, courage. The following morning, the leader of Burkina Faso emerged. There was no grand flourish, no red carpet, just a podium set before the simple national flag. Yet the stillness carried power. Rows of microphones blinked red, streaming his words to 5 continents. "Yesterday," Traoré began, his tone steady, "a former president of the United States chose to speak of Burkina Faso as though we are children needing discipline. Let me be clear, we are not children. We are a people with history, memory, and an unbroken will. Cameras clicked furiously. His next words came slower, deliberate. For decades, my people have watched outsiders chart our destiny, deciding what alliances we may build, what dreams we may pursue. That era is closing. We will choose partners based on respect, not intimidation. And no threat, no economic decree, no diplomatic lecture will erase our dignity. The courtyard was silent except for a soft breeze lifting the flag. To the citizens of Burkina Faso, he continued, I say this. We do not seek conflict with any nation, but neither will we bow. Our sons and daughters deserve a future shaped by courage, not by fear. The cadence of his voice grew firmer, gathering a quiet electricity. I have heard the warnings from across the ocean. I answer with truth. A strong Africa is not a threat to America, unless America clings to the old belief that strength must be theirs alone. We invite friendship, trade, dialogue, but we will never accept chains, whether of iron or of words. The speech spread like wildfire. African radio stations replayed it on the hour, callers describing goosebumps at hearing a leader speak as though Africa finally looked the world in the eye. West African youth groups clipped quotes for TikTok, overlaying them with thundering music. European columnists wrote think pieces, a new Sahelian voice. Even in Washington, aides whispered that the tone was surprisingly statesmanlike. CNN beamed the segment with the headline, Traoré to Trump, Burkina Faso will not bow. Commentators debated whether this marked a new era of Pan-African confidence. Fox News called it defiance wrapped in diplomacy. The Atlantic ran a piece titled, The Captain Who Spoke for the Continent. For Traoré, the noise was secondary. He returned to his office, signed routine papers, and spoke softly to his staff. Our real work is here. The soil, the schools, the security. But words matter. They tell our children whether to stand tall or stoop low. By evening, candles glowed in Ouagadougou cafes as citizens watched replay after replay of their leaders. Steady gaze. Taxi drivers debated which phrase would become the slogan of the moment. No threat will erase our dignity, one said, tapping the steering wheel with pride. For a nation accustomed to being footnotes in foreign policy briefs, the feeling was intoxicating. Burkina Faso had answered back, and the world was listening. The reverberations of Captain Ibrahim Traoré's speech did not fade overnight. They intensified, echoing through capitals far beyond the Sahel. In Paris, the morning papers splashed his image across the front page, his open palm raised against the backdrop of the Burkina Faso flag. Headlines in block letters read, Capitaine défiant, la réponse qui fait trembler Washington. Radio hosts fielded call-ins from French listeners divided between admiration for Traoré's candor and worry over what a fracture in West African alliances might mean for French security interests. In Accra, Dakar, and Bamako, social media burned with pride. Hashtags such as dignity, in the Sahel and Traoré speaks, climbed to trending positions. A Ghanaian university student tweeted, For once the world hears an African leader speak without apology. Our time is now. Beneath the surface of geopolitics, a new mood, equal parts resolve and vindication, was taking root across the region. Trump, meanwhile, awoke to the clip replaying on morning cable shows. His inner circle was split. Some advisors saw an opportunity. Double down, show strength, they urged. Others warned of the optics. He looks fearless, almost heroic. Be careful, sir. The former president, famously allergic to retreat, paced his Mar-a-Lago office. People are saying this guy thinks he's Churchill, he muttered. Nobody talks to me like that. Nobody. Cameras would be rolling again by afternoon. In Ouagadougou, Traoré's advisors convened an emergency meeting in the plain, sunlit council room. Foreign Minister Diallo tapped at her tablet, scrolling through an avalanche of press reactions. They call you defiant but dignified, she reported. There is also speculation Washington may push for sanctions. Finance. Minister Sano frowned. We have reserves, but the signal matters. Investors may hesitate. Traoré leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "We expected this storm," he said. "Let us not be surprised that thunder follows lightning." He summoned his press. Attaché. Issue a clarifying note. We seek friendship, not confrontation. Emphasize development, education, security. No insult, only resolve. To his cabinet, he added softly, "If the world misreads courage as provocation, we will answer again, patiently, firmly." Across the Atlantic, Trump prepared his counterstrike. A hastily arranged interview with a primetime cable host framed his response. "You know, I've dealt with tough people," Trump said, gesturing broadly. "But this young captain, he should be careful. America built markets, gave aid, tremendous aid. Nobody gives like we do. And now he's lecturing us? Terrible. I would negotiate hard. Believe me, Burkina Faso would come around." The host nodded, yet even friendly commentators noted an undertone of unease. Traoré's poise, beamed into millions of screens, contrasted sharply with the ex-president's defensiveness. Back in Burkina Faso, the president's courtyard filled with journalists seeking an exclusive. Traoré declined flamboyance, preferring a quiet walk across the gravel path with a local reporter. "What do you say to people calling this a confrontation?" the reporter asked. Traoré paused beneath a neem tree, the dusty breeze stirring his uniform. "Confrontation is when you wish harm," he replied. "We wish only respect. Our voice is firm because silence has cost Africa too much." Those words, simple yet evocative, rippled once again through the global information stream. A Nairobi columnist wrote, "Burkina Faso's leader has shifted the grammar of African diplomacy. Gone is the pleading tone. Present is a calm certainty." In Berlin, a foreign policy panel debated whether Europe should rethink its Sahel strategy entirely. The optics of bullying a nation whose leader speaks of dignity and self-determination. "It's untenable," argued a German lawmaker. For ordinary Burkinabe, life pulsed on, market vendors bartering over millet, children chasing each other along unpaved lanes, yet everywhere people talked of the speech. Taxi radios hummed with spirited debates, university courtyards buzzed with pride. Older farmers in Bobo-Dioulasso spoke of Thomas Sankara's legacy, nodding that the spirit of sovereignty lives again. In a modest café on Avenue de l'Indépendance, a group of young women entrepreneurs dissected every phrase of Traoré's address. "It wasn't angry," one said, stirring her tea. "It was protective, like a father defending his children." Another added, "Finally, someone says we are not property of distant powers." The African Union quietly requested a briefing, intrigued by the resonance Traoré had sparked. In Addis Ababa, envoys whispered about a Sahel declaration, reaffirming continental self-reliance. Whether symbolic or substantive, the mere idea signaled that a single speech had opened long latched doors. Meanwhile, Trump's rhetoric intensified. At a rally in the Midwest, he thundered, "We're not going to let little regimes tell America what to do. They should be grateful for everything we've done." Cheers rose from the crowd, but international wires interpreted the outburst as combative bluster. Le Monde observed, "His language risks elevating Traoré further, painting him as David to Trump's Goliath." Inside the Burkina Faso Defense Ministry, strategy sessions grew methodical. "We must pair words with reforms," Traoré insisted. "If we speak of dignity, we must build schools, clinics, roads. Pride is not enough. Progress must follow." He toured a rural irrigation project days later, greeting farmers who thrust rough, calloused hands into his. Television cameras captured the earthy authenticity, a leader amid his people, sleeves rolled, sweat on his brow. The footage circulated online with captions like, "Courage has a face." American diplomats stationed in West Africa reported home, "Traoré enjoys unprecedented grassroots legitimacy." Attempts to strong-arm may backfire, bolstering anti-imperial sentiment. State Department analysts quietly advised caution. International think tanks hosted panels titled "The Traoré Moment." A Nigerian scholar remarked, "This is more than one man versus one ex-president. It's the tectonic shift of African self-definition." Viewers scribbled notes as footage replayed. Traoré's composed gaze, his measured diction, His refrain, "No threat will erase our dignity." And in living rooms across Burkina Faso, families gathered around flickering televisions. Grandparents smiled faintly. Teenagers posted selfies captioned, "Stand tall Burkina." A tailor in Ouagadougou told a local journalist, "It's like the world finally looked at us, not through pity but through respect." Traoré, retreating to his modest quarters late one night, reflected aloud to his aide. "This is no victory yet," he murmured, glancing at a map of the Sahel pinned to his wall. "But perhaps we have reclaimed our voice. That is where victory begins." From Washington to Ouagadougou, tension simmered. Would rhetoric escalate into policy? Could dignity and diplomacy coexist? The stage was set, the world leaning forward, waiting for the next chapter of this improbable duel. One man, steady and unflinching, versus the gravitational pull of an old global order. Would you like me to draft part 3, the final, 1,000 words? Next, carrying the narrative toward a climax, global reactions deepening, Traoré's steady defiance, and the symbolic win that captures the world's admiration. The days that followed turned the Sahel into an unlikely fulcrum of global debate. In Nairobi's university halls, students dissected transcripts of both speeches as if parsing scripture. Johannesburg radio talk shows rang with callers insisting Africa's time for unflinching leadership had arrived. In Ouagadougou, murals sprang up overnight, stenciled silhouettes of Traoré beneath bold block letters, "Dignity has no price." Foreign ministries monitored every pulse. European chancelleries, once comfortable with predictable African partners, began drafting memos urging measured outreach. French television anchors debated whether Paris should attempt rapprochement or risk alienating an increasingly self-aware region. In Washington, committees huddled, wary that excessive pressure could transform a young captain into a continental folk hero. Traoré himself seemed almost untouched by the storm. Each morning he walked the palace garden before dawn, listening to the Sahel breeze push through the acacias. "Noise passes," he told an aide. "The land stays." His daily schedule remained anchored in pragmatic work, meeting rural cooperatives, overseeing counterinsurgency planning, pushing literacy programs. He understood that posture alone was empty if unbacked by progress. "A proud, hungry man remains a prisoner," he said quietly, "even if his chains are unseen." Trump, unwilling to concede the narrative, summoned surrogates for a strategy session. "He looks noble because the media loves anyone who stands up to me," Trump barked. "We have to remind people, instability, coups, bad for business." Advisors suggested op-eds, think tank panels, friendly pundits. Yet polls showed little traction. Even Americans distant from African affairs sensed the drama tilting. "The captain seems calm, Trump seems rattled," observed one morning anchor. Flashing side-by-side images, the Burkina Faso leader in quiet profile, the former president mid-gesture, face taut. International correspondents descended upon Ouagadougou, hunting for the human angle. They found bustling markets, dusty soccer pitches, and citizens speaking with unprecedented confidence. "Before they barely knew our name," said a vegetable seller. "Now the world spells Burkina Faso correctly." African diasporas in Paris, New York and Toronto organized solidarity rallies, waving both the Burkina Faso flag and placards declaring, "Respect Africa." Speakers invoked Sankara, Lumumba, Nkrumah, yet stressed Traoré's modern tact. He didn't shout, said, a Ghanaian activist at a Toronto vigil. He simply stood. The crescendo reached Geneva when an impromptu panel at the United Nations assembled under the title, "Sovereignty and Partnership in the 21st Century." Delegates quoted Traoré verbatim, "No threat will erase our dignity." Applause rippled through the chamber, unusual in its spontaneity. Meanwhile, the ex-president doubled down during a televised town hall. "Look, I like Africa," Trump insisted. "Nobody has done more. Nobody. But you can't have a young officer dictating terms. It's dangerous. We have to be tough." The host pressed whether sanctions were on the table. Trump deflected, pivoting to familiar refrains about trade deficits and border security. Viewers sensed defensiveness, even fatigue. Traoré, ever disciplined, released a written statement that afternoon. Burkina Faso will never seek hostility. Partnership built on respect is our goal. We welcome friends who treat us as equals, not subjects. Let words be bridges, not walls. International outlets splashed the sentence across banners. Words as bridges, not walls. Within Burkina Faso, an unexpected renaissance of civic energy stirred. Volunteer programs multiplied. Youth groups organized cleanup drives, literacy workshops, and Sahelian music festivals under slogans celebrating self-reliance. "He gave us more than a speech," said 19-year-old Ibrahim Traoré, no relation, helping repaint a community library. "He gave us permission to believe." The symbolism proved contagious. In neighboring Mali and Niger, community leaders referenced Burkina Faso as proof that dignity need not equal belligerence. Editorials across Africa framed the episode as a watershed, an African voice measured, modern, unapologetic. Trump's circle sensed the momentum slipping. Some advisors urged pivoting away, others wanted sharper rhetoric. Yet fatigue gnawed. News cycles shifted, drawn by fresh controversies stateside. The former president's tirades seemed increasingly like echoes chasing a narrative that had already moved on. One cool Sahelian evening, Traoré hosted a town hall-style meeting in a dusty provincial courtyard. Farmers, students, and midwives gathered, some clutching smartphones, streaming the event live. "We do not fight America," he said, voice carrying across the crowd. "We fight despair. We fight the belief that we must always bow. Let the world know our dream is simple, a Burkina Faso that stands upright, feeds its children, guards its destiny. If the price of that dream is criticism, we pay it gladly." The crowd erupted, not with violent chants, but with a rhythmic clap, palms beating against twilight as if drumming affirmation into the warm air. Old men wiped their eyes. Teenagers hoisted the flag aloft, its green and red swaying against a deepening indigo sky. International correspondents captured the moment. Headlines the next morning declared, "A nation stands upright." Think pieces compared Traoré's composure to historic inflection points when soft words carried heavier weight than saber-rattling. One columnist wrote, "In an age of noise, dignity whispers louder than shouts." In Washington, diplomats conceded privately, "We may have underestimated him." A policy memo advised restraint. Further escalation risks lionizing Traoré across Africa. Pursue dialogue channels. Avoid punitive optics. For a young officer once considered an interim figurehead, this was vindication, recognition that sovereignty was not a bargaining chip but a baseline. Weeks later, a major international magazine published a cover story, "The Captain Who Spoke Truth." Beneath a stark portrait of Traoré, the subhead read, "How a quiet stand in Ouagadougou captivated a restless continent." Analysts noted that while no treaty had been signed, something intangible had shifted: confidence, posture, identity. Late. One evening, Traoré sat on the palace balcony, lantern glow tracing calm lines across his features. An aide approached, tablet in hand. "More invitations, Captain. Summits, panels, interviews." Traoré shook his head gently. "We do not chase microphones. Let our deeds speak." His gaze drifted toward the horizon, where the Sahel met the starlit void. "But remember this night," he said softly. A nation spoke, and the world heard. Soft wind moved through the compound, rustling the flag above. In Ouagadougou's streets, life continued, vendors haggling, children laughing, but an undercurrent of pride threaded each voice. Burkina Faso, Longfoot noted, had written its own sentence in history. Across continents, scholars and citizens alike would recount how a young soldier, calm yet unyielding, answered the bluster of a global titan with measured conviction, and, in doing so, won not just an argument but a fragment of the world's respect. The saga closed not with trumpets or treaties, but with a steady truth. In the theater of power, dignity endures where fear fails. And somewhere in the quiet Sahel, night, Ibrahim Traoré allowed himself the faintest smile, not of victory over a man, but of faith in a people finally standing tall.